Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Future Proof Advisor Circle, the Ritholtz team. So good to be here at Future Proof. What a group. What a lucky guy I am. I get to interview these two. 2 out of the 3 people up on this stage played in the Final Four, played basketball at its highest level, and are tremendous athletes. I bet you can guess which one of us is not in that group. Anyway, I'm delighted to be joined by Jay Williams. He needs no introduction, but he is a professional athlete, an entrepreneur, a broadcaster, a podcaster, a restaurant owner, a father, a husband, a man for all seasons, and Joe McLean, one of our favorite advisors. You're now the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer and the Co-President of Sports and Entertainment at MAI Capital. Joe is also an advisor to a lot of professional athletes, a lot of celebrities. We're going to be talking about business.
Is he a top 10 advisor?
Joe
I just want to I think we need Joe to be a top 10 advisor.
Joe's in his own league. Let's just put it that way.
There you go.
Joe is in his own league, but perennially among the Investopedia 100 most influential advisors. Why? Because Joe is all about education and educating especially his client base, but other advisors about this space, the business of sports, the intersection of sports, media, life, entrepreneurship, growing wealth. It is something that we need more and more of, especially among younger people, and Joe's been at the forefront of that. So I'm delighted to be talking to both of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Both of your careers have really been about pivots and then about sort of acceleration or that trampoline effect, right? You were the number 2 draft pick, as is well known. You had a motorcycle accident earlier in your pro career. You had to make a big pivot and a big change, but you didn't do that passively. You went through a lot to get there. So take us back to that moment when you realized that professional sports was not going to be the way you earned your living going forward.
Well, I was depressed. I went through 2 attempts at suicide. I think for me, it was very challenging because, you know, as somebody that graduated Duke in 3 years, my father, we had this coming to Jesus moment going into my freshman year. You know, Coach K was brilliant at kind of building that bridge between business and sports. And we would do these fantasy camps where guys would pay $15,000, $20,000 literally to live in the dorms that we live in, practice on the same courts that we practice on. And I remember one time, you know, all these executives and CEOs were in one place and I was with Carlos Boozer on the other side, and my dad came and he slapped me upside the head and he said, "What do you want to be one day?" And I said, "I want to be a CEO." And he said, "Well, why the hell are you over here? You need to be over there." So I quickly learned after going over there that a lot of CEOs and a lot of people involved in private equity and VCs, they wanted to be athletes. So there was a bridge to build that connection, that connectivity. But frankly, my identity was what I did. And I think it took me a long time to really discover what businesses I wanted to be involved in after I got hurt, because I had to kind of reteach myself, retrain myself how to tap back into all the different access points that the game of basketball had given me. And I think once I realized what that was, I noticed that I can walk into any door with anybody, and then what was going to allow me to continue to have that footprint, and that's when I started to lean into media.
Right, and you've leaned into it in a big way. And folks, if you haven't been paying attention, there's been some news lately. Jay Williams is joining F1. Wait, did I read that wrong?
There was no reaction from the crowd, by the way, either. 0 reaction. They're like, "What's F1?"
Yeah, that's Formula One to those of you out there. But no, you've made an announcement. You came on Instagram the other day after speculation about what your future might be like with ESPN, creating your own brand, creating your own platform, and you emphatically said yes to all 3. Give us a little bit more texture around what you've decided to do and what we can expect.
So I think similar to how athletes are moving, I think I've been able to build a world around my entire ecosystem. And I think right now within ESPN, it's an interesting time. You know, Bob Iger the other day on CNBC talking about will we take a strategic investment as a partner? Who knows if that could be Google, Apple, Verizon. I think there's a lot of people kind of in that game right now. But I think for me, frankly, I think I bring a unique perspective, and that my value add isn't just in commentary around sports. I think that there is this very fascinating ecosystem and intersection between sports, business, and finance. And I think being able to build something with inside ESPN as my partner, while on top of still doing some day-to-day duties on College Game Day and some other things, right? I think it's a value add to what the network is trying to extend, because we need to extend our athlete relationships, right? Like right now, a lot of our highest revenue drivers are salacious commentary where it's polarizing and they go viral, but it really creates friction between the athletic world and the media world. And for me, building the boardroom with KD and Rich Kleiman, their investment arm, 35 Ventures, seeing what Giannis is doing with Anti-Inc., seeing what Steph Curry's doing with his media company, I think how do we tell more athlete-driven side of the story, and also while you're building a business doing the same time. So that's the ecosystem that I'm going to lean into within ESPN.
Yeah, and for Joe, that's kind of where you've been leaning for a while and kind of pushing your business, joining MAI Capital, launching that part of the business, the intersection between sports, athletes, the investability in not just sports, but in the athlete themselves, and something that both of you have done, which is making the investment in yourselves. Really, that's the through line. Not only are you clients and friends, but that's the through line. So right now, from your perspective, Joe, as you talk to athletes, as you talk to client athletes, how are you talking to them about the way the landscape has changed and how to position themselves for that?
Well, what's interesting is sports and entertainment have become its own asset class now. Like you see now institutional models and private equity funds all trying to get access to that marketplace. And when you look at sports and entertainment, you think about it like a stock. There's growth stocks, value stocks, dividend stocks. There's all types of different ways to get access to it, whether it's curating your own content and owning it and distributing it and telling your story, creating a platform for others that have an aspiration to tell the story, owning different teams. And I think owning franchises is going to look completely different 10 years from now than what it looks like today. And the sports will look differently. Like as of right now, we're doing due diligence on Sail GP, which I don't know if anyone has watched Sail GP, but I would jump on Instagram. It's the Formula One of yacht racing. There's crickets coming to America, obviously pickleball, indoor golf leagues with Tiger Woods. There's just going to be so many different ways to get access to it. And part of our advice with athletes is that you are the asset of the asset class. And so that's changing a mindset in terms of how you want to think about yourself for being a pro, not just on the court or on the field, but also off the court and off the field.
Right. The paycheck you make from playing or participating in sports should be very different from what you do with your money. Joe knows this. I borrow this expression from Joe all the time, which is, how much does it cost to be you?
That's right.
How much does it cost to be the you want to be? So how have you applied that as you realized you were not going to play professional sports? You launched a terrific broadcast career, and now you're facing this moment where you're really investing heavily in your own brand and extending that through other platforms. How are you figuring out the way you want to be able to afford that and pay for that over time?
Well, it's interesting the way everything works. So within MAI Capital, like I'm a partner of Galway Holdings, which is the holdco that actually they're one of our portfolio companies. So I think for me, it's naturally led in that direction. One of my really good friends is a guy named Patrick McCreesh, who worked at Booz Allen for a very long time. Obviously working with a lot of data-driven assignments within the government. We started our own company called Symmetry. This is about 7 or 8 years ago. And I think through working with Symmetry, which is a CDO or CTO as a service, right, to do it at scale, we had 7 or 8 clients from Foot Locker to a lot of Fortune 500 brands, and then that got acquired by Galway Holdings. My family office with Monarch Business, Family, and Wealth with Barry Clawberg, we got acquired by Galway Holdings. So I think now being a partner with John and kind of looking at everything that we're having these conversations about, it's fascinating. Even like with the Saudis, right, and them giving Mbappe $773 million for a 1-year deal. Just where sports and the investment thesis around that is, but also preferred rates within investment opportunities for ownership stakes of teams. It's every athlete's trying to be involved, even entertainers in that world. And I also think there's a below the lines business. Last night I was with one of the biggest steel manufacturers in the world, right? Understanding that they did 1.5 billion square feet of real estate within the Midwest. So you start seeing these underlying businesses and how they're monetized. And I think athletes, entertainers are now saying, hey, look, I can help you scale that by bringing more opportunity to you. And now it's about the curriculum to help them monetize it.
Yeah. So as an advisor, and you have a lot of professional athletes as clients, how do you advise them on looking at that entire 360 opportunity? Because to some of them, this is going to be one of the biggest checks they see, but it also is the opportunity to have the platform, Joe, to establish businesses, to be entrepreneurs, or be investors, be it active or passive. How do you counsel them today?
Well, I think it starts with reminding themselves how they got there, right? With an extraordinary amount of discipline, stuck to the fundamentals, had an extraordinary talent, and then applied a lot of work around it. And so at early stages of your career, it's reminding somebody that your number one jump shot is is your venture capital fund. Like, you've got to go out and perform and establish your brand. And Coach Olson, which we had the blessing of having 2 different college coaches that were around for at least 25 years or more in one program. And so create a culture. And he always reminded me was, it's not who you know, it's what people know about you and how they think about you. And so it's curating your life from your character, both on the court and off the court. And so, but you've got to reserve the right to be an entrepreneur. You can't just get this contract and then blindly start investing as an entrepreneur. You've got to take the steps from a fundamental standpoint, no different than what made you great as a player. And so whether it's sticking to your safety and security bucket and understanding what it costs to be you and always having that kind of cash available, understanding what it means to be liquid versus illiquid, and getting money to work for you and how that works, because that's something that none of us went to college to teach you how to get money working for you. And then once you've created that and you're feeding that bucket of what it costs to be you, now you've reserved the right to be an entrepreneur. Because one of the conversations we have all the time is the strengths that made you great at your respective sport. Bet on yourself at all costs. I'm willing to go broke. I don't care what it takes. I will grind, I will grind, I will grind. I will take all the risks that it takes to make it. Those aren't always the same attributes that make you a great investor. And so it's identifying your personality and your philosophy, reserving the right to be an entrepreneur and taking the right steps to get there. Because that's why now you don't see the stories of people going broke. People are being far more thoughtful about it and recognizing the value that I still have to perform. That's your brand. Is greatness, is excellence, is winning. Right. And then now, how do you take that to win off the field?
So for you, do you remember your first sort of aha moment about wealth, about how wealth is really created, about the way money really works? You remember what that was like for you and what was going on in your life?
1,000,000%. So I got, when I got drafted 2nd overall, one of the first experiences of my life was I got a call from Jerry Reinsdorf. And
former owner of the Bulls.
Yeah. And literally that night, I remember the call coming across and us having a conversation, not only about, what his expectations were of me as a player, but his expectations of me in my brand, coming from Duke, how he knew I wanted to be involved in business, and he wanted to be a person that was going to be on my personal board. And I remember hanging up the phone, talking to my father, saying, I want to be that. This is fun. I think I can make generational wealth doing this, but I have aspirations to be that.
Be the guy on the other side of the phone.
I want to write the checks to the individuals who are helping me scale my business. And I think ownership within team sports is so fascinating. On my way over, we were talking about, it's almost, not that it's bulletproof, but to an extent, think about the Clippers, right? Think about where Donald Sterling got in on that investment, and obviously what happened with that before. Essentially he got asked to go away for $2.3 billion, right? He got asked to go away. So I think and look, the economy can fault during different times. But I think understanding what ownership looks like was the first time at that moment where I was like, okay, no longer am I just a participant to help a brand scale. I want to be the owner of things that I think are organic and authentic to who I am. So that became my whole thesis.
Right, just watching, or listening to the person on the other side of the phone and saying,
that's it.
That's where the power is right now.
Exactly.
So Joe, you also played pro ball after Arizona, but then you went back to get your MBA, right? Why did you decide to do that, and where was your wealth moment along your journey to where you decided, not only do I want to learn this, I want to learn it and teach it?
Yeah. And using the term played when I'm sitting next to him, let's use that very loosely when it comes to me. So when I went to college, I was there to play basketball. I got my degree, but I was really focused on playing, and so I knew I had to go back to grad school and figure out the next transition, and that was by far, I turned 50 this year, that was the hardest transition I've ever made in my life, because the one thing you get with sports is the locker room, the sense of accountability, the routine, the schedule, the collective goals that we're all trying to accomplish, and when you leave the game, it's gone tomorrow. That day. And so for me, I was just looking for another locker room to be a part of, and I did a lot of tech interviews, but found some people in financial services, actually at Franklin Templeton at the time. This is 1998, 99, and they were just a bunch of coaches, and they told me, you don't know nothing about nothing. And the faster you learn that, the faster you'll be curious to start learning something. And so I just kind of grabbed onto that because most of my coaches or teachers were the ones that were the hardest on you and most honest with you. And so I got into financial services and just similar to what my background was in basketball was just trying to get on the floor any way I could. I wasn't always the best player, but I could find a way to stay on the floor and just serve the other guys. And so that's what I wanted to do in sports. My money moment really was I made a good chunk of money over in Europe, and I had given it to a Merrill Lynch investor. And all I knew was you would put it into a tech mutual fund in '99, and it would go from $10 to $110 overnight. Like this is really easy. And then eventually it went from 110 to 0. So I lost all of my money as an early investor in mutual funds in a tech market when the bubble bursted in 2000. But that was the best time for me to learn. I wasn't a retiree, I was a young person, and so it gave me a lot of perspective as to what type of investment philosophy I had to build.
All right, so a lot's happened in the world of the business of sports over the last few decades. If you were counseling Jay as a second round pick today,
Second pick?
round.
I mean, as a second pick, I was just giving it back to you
No,
for
it
the
was
top
good.
10.
I had to catch on to it for a second.
If you were counseling Jay as the second pick, only to Yao Ming, who is 8 feet tall.
7'6", yeah. There's a lot of those guys out
If you were
there.
counseling him as a second pick overall to the National Basketball Association today, what would be some of the first few things you would go over with him?
Well, what's interesting is if it's happening today, they're having these conversations way before the draft, way before even probably college starts because of the NIL landscape and the collective landscape. So there is some kind of conversation around that prior to that. But the first real conversation when it comes to you are the second pick in the draft, and here's your contract is, I don't know if you remember the day, was here's the difference between gross and net of taxes. And so you see that enormous difference between the two. I had a client who said, why do they call it a tax return? Because they never return anything to me.
Or jock tax.
The jock tax and yeah, that's another 10. It's 10% right now in the NBA that you may or may not get back based on the collective bargaining agreement and the profitability of the overall league. But it's having an understanding of the flow of money going in and out of your life, because what I just mentioned before about this great abundance of discipline, but in life, in reality, wherever there's great abundance, most people are less disciplined because it just keeps coming and coming. And in the world of finance, when you're just swiping and the money's going out, but there's still money going in, there's no immediate consequence to what your behaviors are. And so it has to be about this collective co-piloted experience of just asking questions, what it is that you're trying to accomplish. No different than the conversations a lot of people in this room have with their clients. It's universal. But as a 21-year-old or 22-year-old, you may not have 30-year goals, right? We're just still trying to think what we're doing next Friday. And so keep it very, very short term, have very short goals, understand the consequences of it. I want to be a millionaire. Well, let's look at the date. When does that happen? That's a great report to send when you get your first check. You see the taxes. Maybe it's not the first check, but it's the next check. Then you got to stay a millionaire. But if you're overspending, you add too many materialistic things to your life, you don't accomplish that. So at the end of the day, what I would want for Jay is to be the pros pro. Because there are people, when he walks in the locker room, there's going to be pros in that locker room, and there's going to be knuckleheads. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know which one you are, you're probably the knucklehead, right? And so my goal is for when the next number 2 pick walks into the locker room, is they walk directly to his locker, because everybody knows that he's the pros pro.
Right. You were that, but you've also seen and mentored a lot of young pros, and you've seen kid turn pro year after year, superstar after superstar. But you're also concerned that we're not addressing, not everybody gets the counsel of somebody like a Joe. We're not addressing how money works and teaching people the basics when they come into the league or they take that next step professionally. What's missing and what do we need out there?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that I'm personally trying to address, just to be very transparent with everybody. There's a lot of times where I am the only black person in the room, right? And I'm a young black man who's like trying to figure out and navigate this world of high net worth individuals. And, I have 3 kids under 4 right now, so I don't sleep. So this whole theme of, sleep begets sleep, like money begets money. So I think one of the first things I try to tell young athletes is you're so busy trying to reconnect with your friends and the challenges of when you go out to dinner with 10 of your friends, the bill naturally comes to you. You can still love your friends, but why aren't you introducing yourself to the owner? Why don't you introduce yourself to all the minority owners? Why don't you spend time with them in their family offices, with their private equity firms, understanding what their portfolio companies look like? The way I learned how to excel at basketball was you had to get your ass in the gym. The way I've learned to excel with financial management is you have to be involved. Like, a lot of stuff happens through osmosis, having conversations, doing the work, giving like engageful, thoughtful retorts back to people, like learning the vernacular. Like, a lot of times, I see athletes on stages like this, you could tell they're naturally intimidated because they don't really talk about money. So I think that's so important right now. And I think for a lot of athletes too, it's challenging. We were talking about this before in the locker. I don't know who is competent. I'm making decisions based upon, when I get drafted, who I trust. So when I'm 15 years old and Nike's like, we're gonna pay you $1 million. And now all of a sudden I have 4 or 5 agents that are all paying somebody individually on my family that I have to find out about later in the game, right? And then I have financial advisors that are paying other members of my family. Being involved in the insurance industry, all of a sudden cousin Tiffany is trying to be my insurance broker, right? Not even understanding how the fees really even work or what I'm even paying quarterly, how that even happens. So you end up making decisions based upon, oh, you've been around the longest, Caleb, I trust you. But that doesn't mean that you're the most competent. So I think, thank God I had a coach like Coach K was like, hey, here are 5 or 6 individuals who have excelled in this world and who are literally going to give you a tutorial. And I think we mandated that. Help me understand what my budget my rookie year needs to be. I do not want to touch my NBA paycheck. I want to live off my endorsements. Okay, this is how much money I have coming in. This is what that's what I have gross compared to net. Okay, great. This is the lifestyle that I want to live. Oh, I can end up getting a lot more things for free due to my celebrity status. Okay, let me start looking at things very differently. And I think that takes training. That takes discipline. And I think the more people that we have as former players like Joe that can say, I understand what it's like to all of a sudden be given millions of dollars and your mom and your dad are like, oh, aren't you gonna give me some money? It's like, well, there's this thing called gift tax. Can't give you anything over $10,000, but maybe we can make you employees of my S Corp or my LLC. Right? There are different ways to think about it, but having somebody that's gone through that experience, Joe's kind of giving me the look. He's like, that's not even what I would advise these days. Maybe that's changed. That's fine. Joe's like, no, we're not going to do that either. But I think there's just different ways to be relatable instead of just being in a suit and saying, hey, I'm coming down from 1,000 feet. This is what you do, and good luck.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of people that want you to trust them. People come out of the woodworks. We know when people get successful. So it's about that counsel that's so important. What are some of the key mistakes you see people make, even if they have counsel, Joe, when they come into money for the first time, or the promise of money over a 3 to 5 year contract?
It's really hard to say no. Really hard to say no. And part of even on the first day, it's reminding, it's way easier to turn a no into a yes or a maybe than to turn a no or yes back into a no. And so it's just teaching them and professionally how to do that, or even as a partner, how I can help you say no, where someone comes in immediately. Because if you look at the draft, there's a lot of people celebrating behind the couch. And it's like, why are they so happy? Are they really happy for you? And so people will come out of the woodworks and try to monetize a human being. And so having a thoughtful approach as to navigate that, like someone comes in, pitches you a potential deal, can't miss, and this is someone that probably hasn't been successful before, just need $250,000 to get this thing going. Just being able to be thoughtful and say, no problem, thank you for approaching us. I've got a team that's going to send you 10 different questions. If you don't mind going through that, we're going to run an analysis, and then we'll take the meeting after that. I didn't say no. I just gave you the rules of the road to get an opportunity to have a meeting. Most of the time, people will just dismiss that, not go through the approach, and they said no to themselves. And so the more I can help them pre-experience all of these different things that are around the corner, and understand that there is no judgment from me. We're all learning this along the way, that someone's coming into money. I can't just tell them what to do. I think as a great advisor, everybody knows you can't be afraid to get fired. You've got to be very honest, brutally honest sometimes. And most people in sports are for sure afraid to get fired, so they just say yes to everything. I know I can't say no to everything, because it's like, especially with young people, I've got to find ways to say yes to keep them engaged the right way. But I would say the other part that we have a conversation with young people, and I've talked about this before, is preparing a relationship for conflict, because it's going to happen. And I thought early on in my career as an advisor, I would get in someone's face almost like as like a tough coach or a teammate and tell them we're not doing this and here's why we're not doing this, and you have to change your mindset immediately. And I watched young people just start going the other direction. Like, don't tell me what to do, right? And so I thought I was having a real conversation and being thoughtful and honest, and it just wasn't working. And so having a conversation around preparing, saying, hey, I want to talk a little bit about conflict in our relationship. At some point, I'm going to disagree with what you're doing, and you're going to disagree with something I have to say. But in order for us to have a working professional relationship, there's two things that have to happen in every great working relationship. One, there's going to be a compromise between the two of us. And two, there always has to be mutual respect, right? With the compromise, sometimes you're going to win, sometimes I'm going to win, but we're going to keep moving forward professionally. I'm never going to disrespect me or you, so don't disrespect me. So just the more we can have that kind of conversation early, and then when it happens, you can actually remind each other, like, remember what we talked about? We're getting into it. This is good stuff, but there's going to be a compromise. And so these are all things I never really learned early on, and working in financial services. It became a cycle of understanding where your strengths were, what wasn't working, and I found the more I can learn from the clients, the better. That was really powerful.
Kel, can I add to that for a second? I think one of the biggest challenges is fame is one hell of a drug. So, I was with Mark Lazary yesterday, who obviously just had his exit from the Milwaukee Bucks. And we were joking around, like we walk around, like nobody's like, hey, Mark, right? Like Mark's worth a lot of money, just kind of like roaming around, and meanwhile, like a guy like Jaylen Brown signs his 5-year, $305 million contract. Everybody knows that's Jaylen Brown. Everybody knows what his contract is. Everybody knows how much money he makes annually, right? And I think when you become a target, that makes you a recluse in a way. And it makes it more challenging to have trust, because frankly, when you have these conflict type moments, and I've been around very powerful athletes, it happens, oh, you disagree with me? You're fired. Because somebody else is willing to say yes to me because they see the opportunity with the amount of money that I'm making. So I think that trust happens over time. And once again, like, what does your cabinet look like? Like, the president has a cabinet. What is your personal cabinet of advisors that you can have honest conflict with, but at the end of the day, they have your best interests. And that takes a minute to form.
Yeah, I love that. I call that establishing your personal board of directors. And it's not your best friends necessarily or your spouse. It's the people you can have that conversation with that know you and where you want to head next. All right, let's talk a little bit on folks I forgot to mention. You could pop questions in Slido. We'll get to them if we can. And if we don't get to them, these guys may stick around for a minute or two after. But I want to talk about the business of sports, something you both know very well. You are a entertainer, you are an entrepreneur in it, you are also running this now for AMAI Capital. We've seen a lot of changes in just like the last 2 weeks. First, the charter and the Disney resolution. We thought that might be a tipping point, maybe not now, but down the line. We have the big creative agencies now heavily invested in sports, including MMA, UFC, but also in the wider sports portfolio. Let's get for you, first of all, from the inside out, what do you make of the business of sports and sports media today, and where do you think it's going? Do you think it's going in a good direction for all those involved, athletes, shareholders, viewers, et cetera?
There's a lot to unpack there. Let's just start with the finances of it, okay? I truly believe that we are entering a space where there will be shareholders of different college brands. I believe we're going in that direction. There's a reason why Sixth Street Capital is working with JP Morgan Chase to try to get Florida State out of the ACC. And look, the ACC is in a media rights deal with ESPN, I think until 2030. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to have 2 media right deals in that time. So that gap's only going to become larger. So a team like Florida State is going to try to get to an SEC or try to get to the Big Ten, because those teams are making $35, $40 million a year, right? So wouldn't you think that an individual, if you could be an owner of Colorado football or Ohio State football or Alabama football or Duke basketball or Georgetown basketball, these are brand names. So I truly believe that we are
Arizona
basketball, right? But I truly believe that it's going in that direction. We'll see if it can finally get there. And then from a media perspective, it's consolidation of the marketplace with these big streamers, with Amazon, with the media rights that keep coming up each and every year. I mean, I think it was $7 billion for ESPN and Turner, and now I think it's going to be in the range for the NBA, 20 to 21 billion. So, will they take on other partners like Amazon to get a night, an evening? Will Apple like to come to the party and play? So I feel like we have middle margin players who are signing 4 or 5 year, $130 million deals. Like guys that they would be here and nobody would really know who they are, making $125 million over 4 years. So I think the money is becoming so astronomical, and I only see it going up. I mean, you would think that the market will flatten out inevitably, but I don't think it's going to flatten out in sports for a while.
And if sports becomes a more public asset class, like what you're describing,
I mean, WWE,
sky's the limit, right?
Yeah, UFC with William Morris Endeavor.
They're doubling the amount of events they do. Why? Because they can sell them on the pay-per-view. So when he's talking about actually investing in a university like a Florida State, take us through actually how that might play out, or how that's actually playing out today. I know it's happening in the private markets, but for retail investors and those of us that are like, what do you mean? What does he mean?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, it's going to happen. It's going to happen quickly. Probably you'll see announcements here coming shortly. I don't even know how I feel about it. We were talking about how to invest in it. When I initially looked at collectives versus directives in the NIL space, I truly believed in the NIL space in terms of an individual player having direct opportunities and deals and monetizing that. But then when you looked at the collectives that were created, that was just, again, boosters and people coming to get money, people coming together to make sure that university captures all of the revenue, not the player. So they could be driving $1 billion business and then pay out to the players, 2 to 5% of whatever that is. So just manipulating the marketplace again. And so I think we have a lot to solve for in terms of the reality of what are we trying to do. Yeah. So when we look at investing in it, it has to be about a mutual agreement between both the school, the student athlete, and the investors that are trying to get access to it. And so if we are going to invest in Ohio State football, it's understanding, what are all the different merits around the school in terms of what we're trying to accomplish and preparing student athletes to be successful, both financially and also in life. And if we don't think about that, I'm not even going to be interested as an investor. There'll be a lot of copycats just trying to make it a much bigger market for the school so that the school continues to make more money. And it's going to be, as an investor, almost taking a shareholder activist role in this in terms of what you believe in. There'll be ways to make money in it, but I don't want to be a part of it if it's not about really empowering the student athletes the appropriate way, both men and women, because what's being done right now is not the answer. And so hopefully we're moving to a better direction.
And that starts with rev share. And, we talk about, the school and the athletes having a voice. That talks about unionizing. And, the model's already out there. Leagues are already doing it. So, to me, it's inevitable before we're talking about, especially in the highest grossing revenue sports in football and basketball, we're going to be talking about them as employees.
You think the student athletes will unionize and then have collective type bargaining agreements with the universities themselves or the conferences?
It has to go in that direction. You talk about athletes being their own asset class. If we're talking about NIL, and that was one of the tipping points to where we're going, that happens younger. I sit on the board of Overtime Elite, right? So it's essentially like the European model for high school sports. You're paying kids who are 15, 16, 17 years old $250,000 to start training professionally. So, and they're treated as they are employees. Why wouldn't it be the same on the collegiate level, especially as it's very public what media rights are going for, more, and advertisers, and amount of boosters that are part of these collectives, and some of the things these collectives are looking at investing in as well for the school.
Right. We do have a question there about the realignment in the college programs. What does it mean, and where does it go from here? Sounds like the big get bigger, the power get more powerful, right? Is that kind of what we're looking for, especially if the money's going to follow the big teams with the big revenue and the exposure on the networks? Are they just going to get bigger? The bigger conferences get bigger?
I feel bad for, like the Pac-12 used to be the league.
It was a great conference. Yeah, I think we're going to end up with one conference. It's going to be one conference in terms, there'll be investors all over the country allocating and investing to almost like a professional sport in many ways, but I don't see how more than 2 of these conferences survive over time. And on the West Coast, you can kind of see it in terms of, it was all led by media rights and kind of viewers, because we're on at different times, hours of the day, and the East Coast is always going to be the driven main markets. And so the fact that the Pac-10, Pac-12, now being the Pac-2 and going away is tough for me personally, but I can see us over the next 5 years just going to one big conference.
And I also think, similar to Messi's deal, Jose Mas is a good friend down at Inter Miami FC, him getting rev share of the Apple subscription deal. Like, there are certain people that move the needle. Like, think about how many games are on national television for Colorado and Deion Sanders. So, like, there is going to be a world where a guy like Nick Saban, if they can move the needle to that extent, why wouldn't they participate in the rev share? Like, they're going to mandate it. And if they're selling out games every single weekend, and they're the driving force, and he's built media behind it with Barstool, it's been brilliant the way he's kind of built that brand overnight. Like, and they've been sold out every single game. I mean, from literally winning their first game to winning their second game, they're the most talked about team in team sports right now. How does he not deserve a small slice of the rev share?
Sure, and there's a way for him to say, you know what, I've earned you the media, I've earned you these eyeballs, it's time to pay me as well. Let's get a little bit personal, and then we'll wrap it up. You guys both played for legendary coaches, larger-than-life figures, not just coaches, but mentors, right? You talked a little bit about Coach K. I would love to know from both of you quickly, the most important life lesson you learned from Lute Olson and what you learned from Coach K, 1 or 2 of the quick life lessons that they brought you that you'll never forget.
Coach Olson was a huge, high-character person, never cursed. If we cursed, we were thrown out of practice, and inevitably all of us got thrown out of practice at least once. But he was also, what he taught us, there would be, number one, like McDonald's All-Americans coming in on recruiting trips all the time. But he made sure that we would take them out, go to a party, just see how they carried themselves around everybody else. And then the next day, we always huddled up in terms of, he would ask us, what do we think about this person? And there was a ton of McDonald's All-Americans that just didn't fit. They didn't kind of have the character that he set forth for everybody. And he was willing to say, absolutely not, they're not coming. And so what happened was 25 years of players like that and 100 different players that had a culture for the rest of our life and relationships. So he was just big on pushing that. It wasn't about basketball. It was about preparation and life.
Yeah, similar. Coach K used to always talk about the line, best in class. So he would say, hey, I'm recruiting the best in class. And he'd say, Jay, tell me what you know about being a small forward. And I would say, Coach, I'm a point guard. I know nothing about being a small forward. He's like, well, say hello to Mike Dunleavy, who's one of the best small forwards to play the game of college basketball. You guys should share information. Welcome to Shane Battier. So I start learning about all these different positions, and I think it was fascinating because over time, best in class is also what you need to succeed in what we're doing. So are you seeking out the best in class to learn from? Because any executive, you have to delegate responsibilities. So I think learning quickly that I don't know what I don't know, but going to best in class, the experts to learn about things I don't know and lean into that and then take that advisement and apply it to my everyday life, I think has been one of the best traits I've ever learned from him.
All right, you mentioned a couple of teammates, but let's talk about not your favorite, but the teammate you admire the most that you played with, not necessarily because of their athletic ability, but because of their character. I know you got a lot of friends and from a lot of your time.
Overall or in college or just in general?
Overall, overall.
I think didn't get a chance to play with him. I played against him. But I mean, Kobe being Bryant was special to me, and it wasn't Mamba mentality and the way he operationalized that, and what his investment was. Obviously, with some different companies where there was a big payoff. I think he was a high character person that had a lot of high touch points with individuals, and I think it was the first time my rookie year that he started talking to me about the value of myself. Coach K had talked about it, but I don't think I really recognized it until I got to the pros. And I mean, I met some incredible human beings through him that were uber successful in life, but it was on a very human basis. It wasn't about what kind of deal flow did you bring. It was just people striving to try to be better fathers, better husbands. And I think in this world where everybody's so monetarily driven, and we're obviously all incentivized to do that, I think there's a little bit of a character flaw. Like the attention is so fixated and myopic on making money that the character aspect sometimes becomes missing. So I think being with Kobe and kind of seeing how he surrounded himself with those type of people, and granted, he went through the challenges of life, ups and downs, but seeing him towards the end, that's who I aspire to be as a dad to my children and as a husband to my wife, along this path of still trying to be successful entrepreneurially.
How about for you, Joe?
I'd say for me it would be Damon Stoudemire. He was a teammate of mine for 3 years and then Rookie of the Year in the NBA with the Toronto Raptors. But he was by far way better than any of us on the team, but he knew the value of trying to make everybody else better. But then watching his journey in the NBA, the one thing he was very honest with me when he signed a $100+ million deal is we would try to beat each other to practice as we were growing up in terms of who would outwork each other. And he actually was sharing these situations where he had signed the deal and he started hitting the snooze button. And he started, all the things that made him great, he stopped doing. And it took him a while to recognize that personally in terms of why am I hitting this snooze button? Because the money wasn't really the goal. It was just this, becoming Rookie of the Year and wearing the logo on your socks and all that. And that had happened. And then the money came with it. And then it started changing his personality. But the fact that he eventually recognized that and stopped hitting the snooze button was just reminding me of no matter where we're at what stage in life we are, kind of be self-aware in terms of when are you hitting that snooze button and get your butt back out of bed and go back to grinding and enjoying the journey.
Yeah, we all need people like that in our lives to remind us about that. There is a question out there specifically for you, Joe, which is for advisors or planners who are trying to attract athletes as clients. What do you recommend to them? Maybe they're new in their practice and they're trying to break into this world that you've been so successful in. What are your pieces of advice for those folks?
It's really hard. It's really difficult. I would start with your local community, but just be in the service business. There's a lot of young people because they were in sports. Just say, hey, I think I should be serving athletes because I used to play sports. And I would say, what is your technical knowledge? What is your technical skills that you could take from business and apply that to sports and apply that to an athlete? And so the more that you can just go out and build relationships within your network at your college, but just be in the business of serving in terms of education and advice without any thought of trying to build a business. I will tell you 100%, I left Sanford Bernstein and I was doing retirement plans for a lot of 60-year-olds and fairly successfully, but I was really bored and I was not into it. And I had a couple old teammates say, hey, can you look at my stuff? And I looked at it and realized they weren't thinking generational wealth like all these other people were doing. And so I just wanted to serve a couple people and create a mutual admiration club of all these different sports where they could learn from each other. And it just became a business. I had no intention of running a business or monetizing this. It just happened over time. So I think going into it with that perspective that you're not going to make any money on this, and maybe the money will chase you eventually because of your success and your service, but don't go in to monetize it.
Right. If you're not doing everything that you're doing today, Jay, and you've got so much going on right now, what's that one career or one thing you wish you would have tried? What's that career that fascinates you outside of all the different entrepreneurial activities that you've been able to do?
I took my Series 6 when I was 21 years old, and I passed it. It was really hard for me to talk to some of my dear friends about investing their money because I knew that it wasn't going to be me. I knew that I was actually going to be handing it over to somebody else, and I was just the middle person. And being compensated for being the middle person was not who I wanted to be as a human being. I wanted to be knowledgeable. I often think about how my life would be if I had gotten involved heavily in financial services like Joe, because I just think it's a world now in which everybody is moving towards. When I was in college, it wasn't cool to be financially educated, right? Guys were just buying things frivolously, just buying things because they could. And now watching how every athlete is trying to build their own brand, every athlete is thinking about how to monetize their brand. I mean, I have a production company with Giannis called Improbable Media, and one of the first things that we did with his brand was, hey, you're getting paid X amount by JBL, but there's still untapped revenue on the table, right? So now we're gonna handle all the production, and they typically outsource the production and the creative to these third parties. We're gonna have them insource. So I think it's something that we talk about with Galway all the time. as we look for different assets that fit within our portfolio, how do we insource? How do we end up making money on our own money? And I think every athlete should try to have that mentality.
Yeah. Making money on your own money is
Yes.
so important. We're so glad that you ended up doing what you did, and we can't wait to see what's next in this new chapter of your career as an incredible broadcaster, a business builder, an entrepreneur. And Joe, you are revolutionizing your industry as well. Can't wait to see what you're building at MAI Capital. Folks, give it up for Joe McLean and Jay
you.
Williams. Thank you
you.
so much.